We're going to begin this morning with the busy slate of primary elections. Voters in 4 states are heading to the polls to pick party nominees for key governor, Senate, and congressional races this fall. But the focus is really on Georgia, a new battleground that could determine control of Congress. The state continues to draw the ire of former President Trump after election officials there, all Republicans, refused to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. Now some of those key GOP figures are on the ballot facing Trump-backed challengers. We're covering it all this morning with NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray and correspondent Ellison Barber, who's at a polling location in Atlanta. Good morning to both of you. Ellison, let's start with you, and let's start with the Georgia race for Senate. You've been following the Republican Herschel Walker, the Heisman Trophy winner. He has a commanding lead in the polls. What should we know about his campaign and then a potential showdown with Democratic incumbent Reverend Raphael Warnock this fall?
Yeah, I mean, after today, once we have definitively confirmed who the nominees are going to be on each side, it's expected to, of course, be Herschel Walker on the Republican side and incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock on the Democratic side. But this is a race that will very likely determine who controls the United States Senate. Let's look at some of the polls to start off, because most of the action here has been on the Republican side. The Republican primary is crowded, but that being said, Herschel Walker really does have a commanding lead. His closest challenger in the latest poll is trailing by more than 50 points. At a rally in Athens last night, Walker focused a lot of his speech on his personal story and criticizing President Joe Biden and his administration's policies, from actions at the U.S.-Mexico border to economic actions related to inflation and prices that we're seeing at the gas pump. Interestingly, though, as he spoke last night, he never mentioned Senator Raphael Warnock by name. He talked a lot, focused on kind of general Republican issues. We hear Republican candidates in national elections often talk about his anti-abortion stance, his support for police, his support for the military, and he also talked a little bit more about his personal story, specifically mental health issues that he's dealt with the past. Listen to some of what we heard him talk about last night.
I started looking at what they were doing to this country, trying to get your kids to hate themselves because of the color of their skin. You know, you can't do it. Telling kids because you're black, somebody taking advantage of you. They're going to ask me why I'm running, because I'm sick and tired of this. All these people talking this stuff as not what your country can do for you, but as what you can do for your country. But yet they're not doing it. They're putting America second. America not second. When America leads, this whole world is okay. Right now, America is not leading.
So he's alluding there to critical race theory and the debate over that. He is endorsed by former President Donald Trump, and that's actually who encouraged him to run. A lot of the things he talked about seem to mirror some of the talking points, if you will, that we've heard from the president as well. Joe.
So, Mark, in the wake of 2020, Georgia was one of the states to pass restrictive voting laws after the election, which some fear will suppress turnout. This is the first real test of those new rules. What are you going to be watching for?
So far, Joe, early vote turnout has really skyrocketed from what we saw in 2018. And so early on, it does seem that the participation has really increased. But we're going to watch today on how people do on the day of primary vote, if there are long lines, problems with voter access. And it is important to remember that a primary electorate turnout is much different than in a general election. Fewer people participate in primaries than they do come the general election. But as you did mention, this is at least a first test of how people might be able to cast ballots and their access after those voter restrictions.
And one of the races we're also watching, Ellison, the Georgia race for governor. Former Vice President Mike Pence was in the Peach State yesterday. He's rallying support for the incumbent. That's KEMP, who is leading in the polls. This is Pence's latest break from Trump, who's endorsing the former Senator David Perdue. What more should we know about this race?
Yeah, I mean, you look at this race, and it was something that a few months ago felt like it was going to be a whole lot closer than it turned out to be. According to the Real Clear Politics average, KEMP has steadily expanded his lead in the polls. He's now at 56%, with Perdue at 34%. As you said, former President Trump was actually part of a tele-rally last night with former Senator David Perdue around the exact same time that you have former Vice President Mike Pence holding a rally, standing alongside KEMP. This is a big deal, this endorsement, this divide, if you will, because on Pence's side, it's hard to see that rally last night, his support of Kemp, as anything other than a blatant act of political defiance against his former boss. And for a lot of people, they're looking at that and saying, hey, Pence has some different individual political aspirations moving forward, and that may be part of why we're seeing this split here.
And
Joe?
Mark, real quickly, we have primaries also in Alabama, Arkansas, and Texas today. What are you keeping an eye on?
Yeah, Alabama Senate, where you have Richard Shelby retiring from the Senate, Mo Brooks, who had been endorsed by the former president Donald Trump, then that was rescinded, is in a three-way race that could be headed to a runoff. Joe, I'm also a native Texan. There are runoffs happening there, including a progressive versus incumbent, a Democratic member of Congress race, as well as in an attorney general race where the end of the Bush political line and the legacy of the Bush family could very well be at the end of the line if you end up having George P. Bush lose the runoff for attorney general in Texas.
Lots to watch. Ellison and Mark, thank you both so much. We're going to be covering it all day long. Hallie Jackson now will broadcast live from Georgia for the primary election coverage starting at 5 p.m. Eastern. Then at 8 p.m. Eastern, Chuck Todd and Kristen Welker host in-depth coverage and analysis of election results in Alabama, Georgia, and more. You can watch the Meet the Press Election Night special tonight, all right here on NBC News Now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.